JR, aka @Jar's Drawings, is an artist that creates otherworldly and often nightmarish distortions of characters, mascots, icons, etc. from both common and pop culture. JR takes what is at the core of the character in question, and either distorts it or exaggerates it to extreme proportions. In doing so, he creates a perfect monster of the modern age. Without further ado, let's journey into the world of JR's work. Entry 1. Elongated Elmo, Domain Lord. The two brothers hid too well during their game of hide-and-seek. They found themselves in a bright, maze-like place, decorated with doodled-on furniture and drawn-on walls. A distant, high-pitched voice sang a lonesome la 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 la, which echoed against the whine of fluorescent light. Though uncanny, the notes rang familiar, a song from Saturday morning television. The brothers followed the sound, hoping to find their way back to their living room. They wandered winding halls until the tune drew near, and then turned one final corner, only to abruptly stop. Before them sprawled a writhing, red mass, a lengthy creature that extended into the distance with rows of arms straining to support its matted fur body. Gripped fingers frantically scribbled on the ground, and a hollow mouth set beneath wide eyes sang the melody the boys knew so dear. The creature paused its song and gazed curiously at the unexpected arrivals. He had been isolated in his domain for far too long, until now. Before him stood two new friends, lost and alone, feelings he knew all too well. But the boy's longing for home was eclipsed by the creature's craving for companionship. His mouth fell into a smile at his decision, knowing the brothers would never be lonely in their new home. He reached out a bony hand as he warmly proclaimed, "Welcome to Elmo's world," to his new friends. Their faces were clouded with confusion and uncertainty, when fears began to well in the younger brother's eyes as he softly cried for, "Mama? Papa?" Staring at the boys triggered unexpected memories, stirring a deep melancholy he had long suppressed. It was faint. There was fondness. But then, it left him longing. Elmo was hit with a surge of empathy as he stared at the boys below. He gently offered a hand towards them. "Elmo will show you the way," he assured. But Elmo must stay. He grasped arms and elbows to create a ladder of limbs leading to his back, and the boys climbed on. Thus, they began their ascent. Elmo's elongated torso coiled upon itself, reaching higher and higher. The boys trudged through the tangle of red fur, each step motivated by a hope that they were moving closer to home. Elmo slightly slumped as he observed the boys vanish into the distant fog above. The feeling of their footstep and brief friendship was still lingering. Elmo's heart felt heavy, yet oddly full as he mused to himself, thinking of the brothers and their parents. What a sad, unfortunate burden to have someone worth missing. Now Elmo would have that too. Elongated Elmo, aka the Domain Lord, is a good introduction to JR's work for those who are unfamiliar with it. Even though the creature itself is unsettling, the Elmopede is quite friendly, as the only thing that it seemed to desire was companionship, and it even gave that up to help its new friends, even though it was painful. Unsettling creatures of benevolent nature are a recurring theme in JR's work. If these stories and art styles seem familiar to you, some viewers may remember JR from his other popular projects. One of which has seemingly benevolent but unsettling monsters, is Eldertubbies, a cosmic horror distortion of Teletubbies, which I've covered in the past. One also might know JR from his most famous series, Gorefield, in which he takes Garfield comics and distorts and exaggerates the cat's mischievous and often mean-spirited nature to such an extent that the orange kitty becomes an unknowable dark god. Elongated Elmo is an art project of the same nature. JR took an incredibly popular children's mascot and distorted facets of it to create a new being. Rather than Elmo's world just being a reference to Sesame Street, he has not only a world, but a dimension. A spiraling maze of sprawling doodles, perfectly suited for a long, slender, many-limbed Elmo to climb through. While JR often exaggerates the nature of characters, he doesn't usually change them too much. Elmo, as a kind being in his real show, remains that way in his distortion. Even though he has become monstrous, he has not become a monster. He helps the children get back home, as it is his nature, regardless of the physical form one uses to represent him. JR doesn't just cram a popular intellectual property into a monster-shaped extrusion mold. He takes what makes the character work at its core and takes it to a monstrous place. Entry 2. Supersized Ronald, the McNourisher.
Have you eaten yet, child?
Ronald's numerous mouths smacked wetly as he spoke. The small girl shook her head, jittering and desperate for her next fix. She lifted her palms, anxious for whatever meal that Ronald could spare. He reached inward between sweaty folds of flesh and produced a red parcel. With swollen fingertips, he held it just barely out of her reach. Simply the sight of the smiling yellow logo was enough to dilate her pupils and make her body itch. Ronald gestured delicately with his other hands and taunted with a knowing grin.
Are you enjoying the seasonal apple pie, young miss?
Oh yes, sir. Wendy quickly nodded, mouth salivating. I'm loving it. Sorry if my voice acting kills the mood. I mostly do silly crap. Damn, McDonald's addiction hits real. I was almost gonna order it before this. In the second entry, we continue to see JR's method of monster making, and how it creates a creature that feels unnerving, but also true to the character it was based on. Supersized Ronald's grotesque form is almost entirely made of adipose, save for the multiple sets of mouths, as they curl into smiles, strings of saliva glistening with nodules of sugar, salt, and fat welcome the girl to take the neatly folded red package, allowing the pre-digested contents to spike her dopamine for the time being, giving her satisfaction until she must visit the obesity clown for more. There's something goofy like that. I could see another artist taking these characters and just giving them sharp teeth in a distorted form, and while that might be worth a jump scare, it doesn't reach the same level of horror. Case in point, creating a monster that symbolizes the pain of fast food addiction is much more effective than just making a burger clown with sharp teeth. In modern horror, artists often take something not scary and make it scary. There's nothing wrong with doing just that and that alone, but JR elevates this by taking what was the appeal or the idea of the character in the first place, distorting it or exaggerating it to a scary extent, and then creating a monster by combining the character's identity with that concept. In doing so, JR creates a much more effective monster. Entry 2. Grafted Pinocchio, the Truth Keeper. A peculiar tree lies deep within the forests of the unknown, born from the desperation of a man trying to save his ailing son from death. Distressed and despondent, the father carried the boy through the darkness in search of the beast, a rumored wish-granter who dwells in the woods. The beast found the father, lost in shadow, and promptly offered promise of a cure. At the base of an edelwood tree, the father gently laid down his fragile son. Quickly, branches began to wrap around the boy's limbs, vines breaking skin, roots intertwining with muscle and bone. What are you doing? The father protested, fingers scraping at the edelwood, only to be met with pained wails from his son. It was too late. The grafting ran too deep. Your boy will live, the beast's low voice crackled. My son, the father whispered. Are you alive? The son's wooden jaw creaked as it broke free from his bark-bound face. Yes, father, he faintly spoke. Are you in pain, my son? No, father. Then he whimpered, as his nose ever so slightly grew longer. Pinocchio is about a man's obsession with becoming a father. He wishes for his wooden puppet to be a real boy, and it somewhat works, bringing it to life, but still in wooden form. This art piece views that obsession and its consequences differently, and shows it as a loving father's obsession for his son's safety. He can't bear to lose his child, so instead, tries anything he can to stop his son's encroaching fate. In his desperation, he didn't stop to think that, in some instances, maybe death is better. This reads as a reflection of the tragic tales of overextending life, keeping one alive to live an existence that only provides pain just because it would be too painful for those around them to let them go. Modern medicine is a miracle in every sense of the word, and allows people to live longer, happier, and healthier lives than the generations of humans that came before. The dark side of this, however, is that sometimes when nature says it's time to go, it's right, and extending life past then only stands to magnify the pain. Those who are being kept alive may recognize how much they mean to those who sustain them, and in this heartbreaking story, I see a reflection of how they may try to smile through the pain for those who cannot bear to let them go. Entry 4. Immovable Mojo Jojo, the Monolith Mind.
Powerpuff Girls. No more.
Mojo Jojo muttered in contempt after his latest defeat. This next master plan would be victorious, Surely, it would just require deeper planning, complex simulations, intricate calculations, more knowledge. The processing necessary for this endeavor would need to be supplemented by his own mutant intelligence, so he prepared for self-injected biotechnology. Fully connected, he initiated the system and information began to flow into his brain. Within seconds, eureka, the master plan revealed. However, the information flow did not stop. His synapses pulsed swollen, his body paralyzed, changing. A bio-artificial intelligence was created, embedding deep within his cells. Tubes and wires sprouted from skin in search of more data, and his skull grew in an attempt to accommodate his growing brain. Soon he was rendered to a stationary monolith of knowledge, and remained that way for years. After an unprecedented era of peace, the heroine team paid him a visit. What they discovered was a Mojo Jojo who was no longer a threat, but a slave. They gazed up at the blank stare of their once nemesis and could only feel a sadness and pity. Unbeknownst to them, this was the moment Mojo Jojo had been waiting for. Fighting the biotech which coursed through every muscle fiber in his being, he uncurled his finger to point at the far wall of the laboratory. The Powerpuff Girls turned to look and saw it, the power-off switch. Then, with strained vocal cords, Mojo Jojo uttered one final request.
Powerpuff Girls, no more.
I could be wrong, but I feel as though this piece symbolizes obsession and how it can push individuals to unnatural lengths and actions. In an attempt to finally defeat his rival, Mojo Jojo augmented himself beyond the point of no return. His now further advanced intelligence quickly informed him of his mistake as his gray matter grew to overwhelm the strength of his now withering musculature. He knew then that he had one chance to be released from what would be a very long hell of his own creation. He knew they would be back, and he knew he could correct his final mistake. This is a good moment to go over the art itself. His drawings look like they would have a texture one could only describe as blackened ichor. Well, I guess you could describe it another way, but I want goth girls to like me, so. The art style is obviously inspired by manga paneling, and it does an amazing job of conveying the same inky weighted feel. Like how, even though these are made digitally, they still somehow look and feel like ink on canvas. Often using only exceptional detailing and black and white, the lack of color leads to a textured feeling. Entry 5. The Emboldened Squid. Two best friends had not seen their neighbor in months. Years and years of pouring his heart and soul into art, and he was still not recognized. Last they witnessed was the squid rambling manic and determined as he dragged his tentacles into his stone abode. One day, an invitation arrived to all those in town. The grand opening to an art premiere by the self-proclaimed savant. It was fabled to be the reveal of the century, and gathered a crowd worthy of such. They stood outside the squid's home and waited, but to no avail. The two friends volunteered to enter their neighbor's home and investigate. What greeted them was an oppressive sight. A gargantuan abstract sculpture towering over them in the likeness of their friend. Their initial awe turned to fear when the pair made a shocking realization. The sculpture was made of flesh. Born from the squid's regenerative tentacles, the artist spent the last many months amputating, regrowing, compacting, and molding his own limbs into the monolith. However, each regeneration grew less and less materials. Only one section remained unfilled, but the night before the unveiling, his tentacles refused to rejuvenate, so he crawled his way into the opening and embedded himself into the cavity like a puzzle. If not just his heart and soul, then his body would surely create the ultimate masterpiece worthy of a legacy. And so it was. The gasps, screams, and yells of the growing audience echoed in the squid's ears. He let himself rest one last time, at peace knowing his art was finally being seen. This art piece was based on one of the most famous pieces of fine art, that of Bold and Brash by the Renaissance artist Squidward Tentacles. A lot of people say that artists put themselves into their work. By this they mean taking their struggles, emotions, stories, and if they're political, angry opinions and putting it into their art. Personally, I do this as a way of processing my emotions, and putting things that happen to me into perspective, as seeing it take a different form, like an image or story, can give context that just thinking about it in one's mind often can't. Many find this practice helpful both for maintaining well-being and artistic inspiration. However, there is also a darker side to this process, as some may find themselves only able to express themselves this way after a while. What was once a set of tools an artist used to understand the world becomes an obsession. One can isolate themselves from others in their pursuits, and eventually this understanding of the world rots away, replaced by their lonely sense of the world they created in their own mind. The only thing left is an undying need to express something to those they are now hopelessly disconnected from. Or something goofy like that. This piece takes that process and puts it more literally. Unable to connect to others with ideas alone, he turned to his physical form. Squidward severed his own limbs over and over to build the fleshy monolith, and finally put what was left of his own body into the sculpture as a macabre signature for his final work. A man overtaken by his need to be appreciated, pushed by ego and hubris, decides that his art being seen is more valuable than his life. Anything for views. Ashes to ashes. Dust to dust. Entry 6. Patched Hobs. The Perpetual. It started with a fad. The kids at school kept drawing some creepy house cat on the whiteboards. Calvin saw these and laughed. He too drew some of his own. Perhaps too much. Soon, the imagery began trickling into the recesses of his mind, permeating his waking thoughts and imagination. Even his beloved Hobs wasn't safe from corruption. It's not denial. I'm just very selective about the reality I accept. Calvin's mantra now haunted him as he stumbled through the forest, trying to run from that thing. He found the familiar creek that he and his best friend traversed countless times before, when an unfamiliar wrinkle in the log caught his foot and sent him careening to his knees. In a panic, he collected himself, but felt a looming presence nearby. Askance, he dared turn around. There stood the beast, its body bursting at the seams and glistening innards barely confined by the sutures. What was once Hob greeted him with a wide, sardonic grin.
Don't worry.
It spoke with guttural assurance.
I'm not going anywhere, Calvin.
Days and nights spent sleepless, but Hobbs's words held true. Instead, he degenerated, sprouting extra limbs, innards spilling from unbound sutures, wounds weeping, shadowing relentlessly. This time, Calvin sought out sanctuary at their beloved maple tree, desperate for a nap like old times. Reality continues to ruin my life, Calvin whispered to himself, eyes heavy. He closed them for a second when he felt the sudden weight of an unblinking gaze on his back.
Things are never quite as scary when you have a best friend.
Hobbs tempted with a low growl. Desperate, browbeaten, Calvin couldn't fight it any longer. Bracing himself with the trunk of the maple, he stood to meet Hobbs' stare, and with a tentative hand, he reached out towards his friend. For those who somehow don't know the story of Calvin and Hobbs, the central premise is that a boy named Calvin has an imaginary friend tiger named Hobbs. In the original, this is played in a cute fashion and is a wholesome symbol of childhood imagination. In JR's distortion, the character of Hobbs hinges on the same idea, but this has a much more sinister approach. Rather than remaining an imaginary friend, Hobbs begins to degenerate into a disturbing, intrusive thought, an entirely separate entity. I don't know if I'm off base here, but this kind of reads to me like mental health issues. At the very least, it reads like some sort of inability to tell the difference between fantasy and reality, because he's gauging the giant imaginary tiger as the reality that's destroying his life. A lot of people make that joke about Calvin and Hobbs in general, because Calvin really believes in Hobbs to a degree where it can sometimes play like schizophrenia. And I believe JR may be playing on this notion, but again, I'm not sure. This could also be a demonic distortion of the character, in that JR is making Hobbs out to be some sort of dark entity that has latched onto Calvin. Either one seems like it could work here. Entry 7. Algorithmon. The Feed Fiend. Swipe. Swipe. Double tap. Save. Your thumb moves with practiced lethargy, scrolling through an endless feed of posts, memes, videos, and ads. What once began as a harmless pastime has gradually evolved into an addiction. Swipe. Swipe. Chuckle. Save. The deeper you scroll, the more restless and internal battle rages. Part of you longs to break free, but the constant dopamine hits keep you chained to the screen. The real world calls. But why confront the numbing gray of reality when bespoke entertainment is delivered directly to your fingertips, calculated to your every preference? That's right, a voice whispers. Stay, and I'll take care of you. Deep down, you know you should stop, but instead you hold on to the comforting lie. Just a few more minutes won't hurt. You release all inhibition and sink deeper into the pit. letting the algorithm tighten its grip. These art pieces have all been about media. For the final entry, I would like to present what JR has to say about the current medium we absorb the art through. Social media honestly does seem like the logical extreme when it comes to media being fed through addictive mediums. People used to call the ease of access to tens of television stations a danger of addiction, and oh boy if they could only see us now. The engagement features of social media are designed to be intentionally hard to stop using, and because of it, these companies have essentially become engineers of addiction, converting the unknowable horror of the algorithm into the unknowable horror algorithmon. The Feed Fiend, a personified beast meant to maintain control over your conscious mind for all eternity. A manipulative, intelligent force that will stop at nothing to find the right things to put in front of you to maintain your attention indefinitely, slowly stealing your life away from you as you rot in its gnarled hands. Or something goofy like that. Rampart Rapunzel, the Forlorn. She was cursed with everlasting life, to be isolated in a tower until true love came for her rescue. Nightly, her wailings could be heard in kingdoms afar, as she beckoned for her promised Prince Charming. She waited and waited, patience outlasting generations of kings and queens, but to no avail. Eventually, her cries became naught but the whistle of the wind and the makings of a legend. The forgotten princess, trapped in a cloud-bound tower. The passing years took its toll on her, and she grew as time-worn and decrepit as her broken, despondent heart. Then, one day, once upon a time, her call was answered. She craned her elongated neck downward to gaze below, spine stretched from the pull of gravity and the weight of her burdens. There, a figure stood atop a neighboring pillar, who loudly proclaimed words that brought tears to her eyes. Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair. As is typical for JR's work, he has taken aspects of the classic fairy tale Rapunzel and explores them in a new way that shows the monstrous nature of the story in question. If Rapunzel were actually isolated in a tower for that long of a time, she likely couldn't do the things that human beings need to do to take care of themselves, like exercise or see the sun. Her ass is not touching enough grass. Because she never had to see anyone, she likely stopped bathing or tending to herself in even the most basic of fashions. Her hair would grow unkempt, along with her nails. Depression would set in, and she could become fully sedentary, where she would gain weight, and her skin could develop lesions and bed sores from rotting away in one spot. Not only the body, but what happened to her mind is likely much worse. Without seeing a single human being, she would go mad, and it would be similar to the psychosis we see in inmates who are in extended solitary confinement. However, as is also a consistent theme to JR's work, the story ends on a positive note, as she was finally rescued by her Prince Charming. Hopefully, she still feels that way once she sees her raggedy-ass self. Guardian Humpty Dumpty, the Unfallen. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty protected them all. Through war and calamity, he guarded the gate. Millennium King Guard, a double-edged fate. Despite honor and glory, the role took its toll. They would mend his shell, but they could not his broke soul. He begged for respite, a release, his own end. One more war, the king promised, but did not intend. For all the king's horses and all the king's men would not stop putting Humpty together again. In this piece, JR takes the popular Humpty Dumpty children's rhyme and flips the concept on its head. Rather than Humpty Dumpty climbing a great wall, having a great fall, and then not being able to be put back together again, this takes the opposite approach. And the king's men keep doing it over and over again until his cracked, broken form was barely held together, with a hollow shell of a being inside compared to that of who he once was. This iteration of Humpty Dumpty reminds me of the myth of Pet Cemetery. In that story, one can bury their dead in a cursed cemetery that brings them back to life. However, when the being returns to the land of the living, the soul doesn't come back with the body, and the being is not the same. In Pet Cemetery, it results in some gruesome mishaps, but in this case, it extends the pain and suffering of a noble guardian egg. Despite his fragmented soul, his zombified corporeal form still takes the noble path of protecting his home. In return, the king puts him back together, never letting his soul know true peace. Or something goofy like that. Tempest, the Time Eater. POV. An entity emerges from the folds of time, looming over your slumbering self. A mechanical ticking emanates from its clock face, lulling you into a deeper sleep. It extends an ephemeral appendage, fingertip delicately poised above your head. The ticking sound speeds up as the minute hand loops forward a full cycle, and a single hour of time is drained from you. Its hunger satiated, its life prolonged, the creature retreats in search of its next victim. Your alarm awakens you hours later, and you feel more groggy than usual. You look in the mirror and see what was once youthful glow now bears the marks of time. You cannot help but think of its inevitability, relentless and unforgiving in its forward march, uncaring and indifferent to your existence. There never seems to be enough time in the day, and today you have an hour less. You shake your head and begin brushing your teeth, silently cursing the mild inconvenience of daylight savings time. Unless I'm missing some major details, which I often do, this one is more lighthearted and simplistic than the other entries. In this piece, JR creates a fun time-eating god to explain the man-made time change of daylight savings time. In this universe, daylight savings is not some sort of widely observed event where people change their clocks 1 hour in order to keep pace with the rest of the community, which it does for some reason that used to involve farmers but doesn't anymore. I don't know. But rather, the result of an extra-dimensional being that likes to steal time from you while you sleep. This creature simply uses daylight savings as a masquerade to hide its evil time-stealing deeds. Which begs the question, how do we know that this isn't what happens in real life? I don't know, I'm not retarded. Oracle Palm, the fortune feeder. It started with Myers-Briggs, introducing her to the slippery slope of personality tests and online quizzes. She quickly grew obsessed, spending late nights exhausting the internet's knowledge of enneagrams, Hogwarts houses, astrology, attachment style, anything she could find to aid her journey in self-discovery. Still, she hungered for more. The depths of the dark web rumored an ancient cave-dwelling being. It was blind in sight, but omniscient to one's past, present, and future. Her entire fortune, revealed and predestined, she would want it no other way. Pale pupils stared through her as she sat on the being's cold palm. Crowded overlapping fingers above muffled the cavern's echo. As yet more limbs reached toward her, a beckon. With one deep breath, she raised her hand to meet the oracle palm's knowing touch, and resigned to her fate as she spoke. BuzzFeed. What cheesecake am I? This is a really fun combination of those old BuzzFeed quizzes from back in the day, mixed with the horrible fate of knowing all that lies in one's own future. If you know what's coming in the future, you can't really grow from or enjoy the experiences in your life because you'll just be concerned with what they are leading to. TLDR, if you know how you die, you won't do anything except try to avoid your own death, which, in the process, will probably cause it. In this piece, the online personality quizzes take the form of an oracle rather than absolute bullshit, and it appears that their knowledge is actually worth something, and that too much of it is intoxicating, paralyzing, addicting. She fell victim to these quizzes and needed to know more and more, throwing information into a pit that will never be filled. In finding out what type of cheesecake she was, she then fell into a cycle where she did nothing but these quizzes, becoming a hollow shell of the cheesecake she once was. Side note, I always thought these BuzzFeed quizzes were stupid and narcissistic and not even good despite that, because I did not enjoy them and I am often stupid and narcissistic, so I am the target audience and they still kind of sucked every time. Kind of dumb for me to expect anything else from BuzzFeed though. Moving on. Colossal Luigi, the little brother. Luigi grew tired of living in his brother's shadow. It was time for a change. He downed a single one-up mushroom, then another, and then he lost track. The effects were first delayed, and then suddenly compounded and spread fast. His body could not keep up with his own growth. Mushrooms pushed through the swollen skin and feathered his silhouette, and soon his eyes hollowed into sockets, pitted with regret. Yet, he was helpless to the will of the fungus, and continued to mindlessly consume. Mario found his way to the top of the staircase and stared past the finish flag. The castle was missing, and so were the guards. He gazed upward at his colossal little brother, dreading the confirmation of his suspicions. Luigi? Where's Toad?
Brother,
Luigi groaned with an exhale of spores.
help us.
Oh, Luigi! I knew he liked the mushrooms, but I didn't know his mental health was this far gone. Mamma mia! Last time Luigi was this upset, the United Healthcare incident happened.
This piece takes a common joke on the internet, how Luigi must be mad about being in his brother's shadow, and uses the fantastical nature of the Mario Brothers world to give him a disturbing breakdown for it. The degrading feeling of constantly being second best led him to push himself to do something drastic, something permanent. He abused the mushrooms until his physical form was unrecognizable, even consuming his own fungal friends to get their growth properties. This piece reminds me of the steroid epidemic in the younger generations today. I know it sounds unrelated, but hear me out. Many people only get on performance-enhancing drugs because they feel like they can never get what they want naturally, and they see those around them far exceeding their own progress. Eventually, they give in. In some cases, they push the dial so far that they become monstrous in proportion, and the goal they once had falls to the wayside in favor of satiation of more and more. Or something goofy like that. Look, if you seriously lift weights, having the thought about doing steroids is like peeing in the shower. There's two types of people. Those who have and liars. I said having the thought, not doing it. The dense mists and heavy dark made navigating the dungeon a suffocating endeavor. It had been 2 days since Navi had fled this place, visibly upset after Link bottled 2 fairies at the dungeon's entrance. Penitent, he desperately searched for his companion. Even with the light of his fairy bottles, he could not see more than an arm's length ahead. Suddenly, a gust of wind shoved Link backwards, clearing away a large patch of fog. A massive presence loomed before him, silhouetted in the shadows. Link drew his sword as the entity began to flicker into a pulsating glow, revealing a fiendish fairy goddess, unlike any he had seen before. He braced himself to slay yet another dungeon boss, when his heart sank. The creature gestured contortedly towards an empty glass vessel in her arms. With a spiteful grin, she piercingly uttered 2 familiar words. "Hey, listen." This is a classic tale of payback for who is usually the protagonist of the Zelda games, Link. He never quite thought about all those fairies he shoved into bottles. If you think about those creatures as conscious beings, the game takes a much more sinister undertone. Rather than Link just using a tool that he found, it's Link enslaving an intelligent creature, leaving it imprisoned in a glass bottle, essentially subjecting it to solitary confinement until he deems them no longer useful. Or worse yet, forgets about them entirely, leaving them trapped there. The phrase, "hey listen," is a catchphrase from the character Navi, a fairy that Link often uses to aid him in his adventures, and gives Link advice in the game. This is a good distortion of that character, since it reveals her to be bitter about Link's treatment towards her fellow fairy. And instead of just leaving her as a helpless tool of a side character, it gives her a spiteful agency that would likely be much more realistic to the relationship in question. "It's just part of tradition," the villager rationalized against emotion as he stared at the glowing eyes ahead. Clanging chains and shackles rang loud with struggle as the voiceless beast shied away. "Yes, the festival needs pumpkins." The villager broke gaze and gripped his blade tight, stepping forward with a whisper under his breath. "Just one more." This piece depicts a contorted version of the time-honored tradition of gathering pumpkins to carve. But instead of them just being vegetables like a squash or Stephen Hawking, these are moving, conscious beings. The pumpkin patch has been personified into a massive being of its own, with pumpkin tumors that sprout and grow from its back. I can't imagine that harvesting these with a sword would be painless, or even allow the creature who sprouts them to survive. The art also calls into question tradition in general. Sure, carving pumpkins is harmless, but there are many harmful traditions that are continued just because that's the way it's always been. The villager looks up at the pained, suffering beast that he needs to kill to satisfy tradition, and he has a moment of empathy and regret before doing what is expected of him. Even though he feels it is wrong, he doesn't want to be the one to break the last link in the chain. After all, is he really smarter, better, or more moral than every one of his ancestors that worked to further this before him? I don't know, maybe. That's a good question. I'm not going to answer it.
Over the hills and far away.
Time for Teletubbies.
Teletubbies was a kids' TV series that premiered on cable in the late 90s and 2000s about a group of multicolored creatures with televisions implanted in their stomachs. This show also featured a living vacuum by the name of Noo Noo, and the disembodied head of a newborn baby, which takes the place of the sun. Hearing this summary, you may be wondering, what the actual fuck did I just say? But buckle up, folks, because this version, the version you're all familiar with, this is the more normal version. Introducing the Eldertubbies. Created by One Jar Arts, an eldritch, nightmarish distortion of these nostalgic creatures from childhood. The Council of Eldertubbies. The council gathers after a long night. Only one more viewer to collect before the break of dawn. Eldertubby Tinky Winky, the greeter. Eldertubby Dipsy, the curious. Eldertubby Lala, the maternal. Eldertubby Poe, the sovereign. Along the lines of Gorefield, another nightmarish distortion of a simple yet incredibly popular media franchise to an unknowable extent. This depiction reflects how truly otherworldly the concepts in the show actually are. It takes into account the questions the more seasoned viewer must have. What exactly are these creatures? Isn't it strange how happy the Teletubbies are to have a TV wired directly into their gut? How do you think you would truly react if you saw a pack of humanoid creatures with screens bored into the bare flesh of their stomachs? With joy? Is it me? Or is Eldertubby Lala kinda hot for some fucked up reason? Why does the sun have a face? And why is it the face of a baby? Rather than just suspending disbelief and accepting that's how the Teletubbies world is, or answering these questions, Eldertubbies weaves a sense of unknowability into this world. Instead of just ignoring the strange aspects of the series, and going on with a simple happy-go-lucky storyline, Eldertubbies fixates on them, and exaggerates them. Noo Noo is a perfect example of this. In the regular Teletubbies show, he cleans up after any messes in the Teletubbies world. And he's happy. And that's it. Not so much the case in Eldertubbies. Noo Noo's story goes a little something like this. Elder Noo Noo, the vacant. They say the machine once lived coexistent with the Tubbies. However, as they grew older, larger, and wiser, the machine instead grew restless and jealous, for its stagnant shell had only served the same hollow purpose throughout the years. The machine left the group and wandered the forest in search of the vitality and life it so severely craved. Over time, it amassed pounds upon pounds of flesh, and it indeed began to grow larger. Yet, it felt empty all the same. Perhaps one more body, one more limb, one more lung, one more heart. Maybe then, Noo Noo would feel alive. Well, that was creepy as shit. Anyways, vacuums are often metaphors for empty spaces, or endless hunger. Noo Noo, being a living vacuum, was ripe for symbolism about consumption and filling a void. And how having an existence that doesn't provide satisfaction can lead one to a destructive cycle revolving around filling said emptiness. Couldn't be me. The fallacy of looking for the answer to a spiritual problem with material means. This metaphor is taken one step further, with Noo Noo's endless consumption swelling him into a mass of flesh. As he grew, he didn't get any more satiated. His larger body only requires more and more to sustain itself. Noo Noo's story proves that throwing more into the bottomless pit doesn't shrink the hunger, but instead grows the appetite. I wonder if that's a heavy-handed commentary on any systems in any societies, wink wink. What the hell am I talking about again?
Elder Sun Baby, the Daymaker. Over the hills and far away, the Eldertubby Council gathered with their collected viewers, unprepared for what awaited them beyond the horizon. Only the lucky few survived the long night of wandering through the woods, but it would be worth all the risk just to watch the sun rise. Normally obscured by the infinite maze of trees and mist, there exists a clearing where the sun shines unfiltered, the path to which is only known by the Eldertubbies. Catching a glimpse of the Eldertubby during the long night is a blessing in itself. Being a chosen viewer, an experience embedded in legend. There it was, the first signs of light breaking the horizon. Radiant beams rose in the distance with dancing rays. The previous distant chanting grew louder, echoes surrounding the viewer. The sky brightened, then became brighter still. The sounds deafening, the sun blinding. And then, a face. Time for Teletubbies. Time for Teletubbies. Say hello.
This show primarily takes place during the day, or at least to my knowledge, because you're not gonna make me watch every fucking Teletubbies episode ever made. Therefore, the Sun Baby in the Eldritch depiction acts as the timekeeper for the entire world. Life only moves when the weird Sun Baby does, or some shit. The interesting thing about this fresh, weird, creepy-ass depiction of Teletubbies is that it's essentially the same show, but the art style and narration is just a bit different. If you look at any of the themes explored in Eldertubbies, it's the same as in the original show. It just distorts it and takes it a bit further. I mean, if you take a look at the Teletubbies character descriptions next to the Eldertubbies character descriptions, it perfectly corresponds. Tinky Winky is the elder greeter, and in Teletubbies, he always goes first. Noo Noo exists solely to consume refuse in both iterations. He's just a little bit more pissed about it in the new one. Consuming refuse might sound like a terrible existence, but it's important to remember that one man's hell is another man's fetish. The Sun Baby is technically still what he was before, a giant solar baby monster. It's almost as if they're in the exact same universe. We just have a better understanding of how the world works in the Eldertubbies description. A creature with a television wired into its bowels doesn't seem natural. I've never seen a living vacuum in real life, and the world's sun is distinctly lacking in infants' faces. In both worlds, something else is going on. The only way to truly explain all that weird shit in a way that would make sense would be to acknowledge the ramifications behind what's presented. It really is true what they say. Ignorance is bliss, and I just stole that from you. What's more likely, that a creature would be born with a TV in its chest, or that some sort of monstrous interference would cause it to be engineered like that? That a vacuum, a machine made to consume refuse, when endowed with sentience would ever have enough to consume, or that it would consume and grow uncontained? That the sun would have the face of a human baby, even though there's no other documented humans in that universe just because it's fun, or that it's actually a part of a giant creature, and most of that creature's body looms just outside the visible spectrum of our atmosphere. Honestly, I'm not sure of the answer to any of those questions, but it makes you think, doesn't it? One thing that really stuck with me about this lore is the idea of collecting viewers. This is likely connected to the idea of the original source material being a TV show, and the fact that shows are created for viewers. Viewers being collected could refer to the kind of objectification that happens to the viewer when the view gets monetized. But hey, I'm a YouTube creator, and when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Elder Moon Baby, the dream catcher. Through the fog and further beyond, the Eldertubby Council heard its cry. It was a different cry, one not heard of for centuries. It was a whisper at first, but soon it waxed and waned with siren allure, guiding the council through the maze of mist to a new forest clearing. Could it be? The long-lost twin? There it was, a luminescent hum breaking over the trees, casting a cold light across the midnight sky. Brighter it grew as its hands spilled over with collected dreams and nightmares. Still more hands reached in towards its belly, fingers gripping tight. It began to pull, wider and wider, until its body gave way to reveal a vast opening, infinitely dark and impossibly deep. The melancholic cry then morphed into an inviting harmony as it perched steady, stomach wide, beckoning entry into the forbidden void.
Time for Teletubbies. Do you enter?
The eclipse of the elder babies. The forest was quiet, the sky cloudless and vastly deep, the spectacle above. This was anything but scheduled programming. It was a lost episode, forbidden footage, unscripted, redacted. The Elder Sun Baby and Elder Moon Baby were crossing paths in an unprecedented cosmic eclipse. The twins illuminated their halos with a faint, rhythmic blinking. Then brighter, with increasingly intense bloom, they raised their heads up high and opened their mouths, letting loose a haunting wail accompanied by rolling tears. Soon, galaxies far off began to twinkle in synchrony as distant alien elder children joined their desperate call. The earth was trembling, and the skies were blindingly bright, a signal that could be seen from across the universe. It was a cry for help that could be quelled by only one. Do not fret, children. Everything will be okay. Mother will be here soon.
Holy shit! Time for Teletubbies is right. It appears that the Eldertubbies lore doesn't stop where the show does. Jar Arts, the author of Teletubbies, expanded upon this world with his own additions. His first edition, the mirror image of the Sun Baby, the Moon Baby. Oh, he can have a friend! The unexpected crossing of paths of which seems to have stirred the entire galaxy, which may reveal the deeper lore behind the Eldertubbies. Anyone else wonder what's up with the giant Astral Baby collision, or is it just me? Evidently, the Sun and Moon Baby had never come together before. When they finally met, they output some sort of signal into the universe, Responding to the Sky Baby signal, galaxies began to react as if they were receiving this message. Looks like the key to solving the Fermi paradox was just Teletubbies this whole time. Why does anybody even try? The text also alludes to alien elder children, and a mother figure. I believe that these paragraphs are huge major hints in the story of this world. The mother being, whatever it may be, gave birth to the astral babies and eldertubbies out of some giant sky pussy or something, and then left them across the universe. However, what other eldertubbies exist out there? What the signal means, or what the mother figure did this for is still a mystery. Oh boy, I sure hope that there's more entries that elaborate on exactly what the fuck questions that I made up.
Eldertubby Zoo, the pioneer, rooted fingers braced deep into the soft, alien terrain. The alien eldertubby was one of many pioneers, sowed by Mother across seed planets scattered throughout space and time. The eldertubby subtly shifted its tunnel of antennae to amplify the faint, few signals which made it through the foreign planet's thick atmosphere. Meanwhile, alien tubby nymphs gathered patiently below as rainbow waveform hues buzzed from the elder's glowing belly. Finally, the static began to clear. The family tuned into scheduled programming as the misty morning was greeted by a familiar melody, the anthem of the universe. Time for Teletubbies. Eldertubby Erd, the stone sword gatekeeper. Time was lost to the Tarnished Four as they navigated through a labyrinth maze of blades. It was a cemetery of weapons from fallen warriors of the land, amassed by the gatekeeper of these parts. Despite the high caliber of gear that adorned the terrain, the four dared not touch and risk disrupting their careful order. Finally, in the foggy distance, they spotted a lumbering mass. Its silhouette revealed innumerable hands pulling swords from the ground, only to shuffle them back with meticulous organization. The Tarnished Four approached the being with caution, but realized they could not break its fixation to the task. Only when they unsheathed their armaments did its attention peak. The gatekeeper stretched upright and turned to glare with piercing, beaded eyes. Outer limbs reached towards cataloged blades with blind familiarity and gripped tight, yet more hands beckoned a welcome toward the fog gate embedded in its belly, taunting the Tarnished Four to try and enter. The four braced themselves for the strong foe ahead, as an eerie melody and chant pierced the night.
Time to Teletubbies.
Eldertubby Snoo, the Placekeeper. Lines of fiber pulsated with information as signals from across the world transmitted into the Elder's system. The world gathered at its feet and stared up at the canvas displayed on its belly. It was a masterful collaboration effort from an unpredictable hive mind, each pixel placed in perfect chaos over the course of 4 days. It was beautiful. It was art. It was coming to an end. The Elder's body began to sparkle as pixels began floating off into the sky. The community watched with melancholy as their masterpiece inexorably faded into white. The Elder stared down with benevolent eyes, which conveyed one last message of hope to all. This will always be our place.
Well, that's a lot to unpack. Initially, I believed the alien eldertubbies to be some sort of deep space equivalent to the Earth ones. But there's 4 Earth eldertubbies and 3 aliens, so that doesn't really add up. It appears that Eldertubby Zoo was taking care of a group of what were called tubby nymphs, providing them content to watch from his belly screen. The content may be coming from the very same signal that the elder babies were broadcasting. Nymphs, in nature, are usually a life cycle phase before adults and creatures that go through metamorphosis. So the content emanating from Eldertubby Zoo is likely nurturing these creatures to mature, likely into eldertubbies themselves. It is at this point that I want to bring up a theory that my viewers angrily and repeatedly expressed in the comments of the last video. The eldertubbies are perhaps intended to be the Teletubbies as they aged. The Teletubbies were babies of some sort of eldritch species, and this is just what happened to them and the world as they grew up. In this world, the Teletubbies as we know them from the actual television series are actually tubby nymphs. We're seeing them in the future, when fully grown to their unknowable, otherworldly potential. The entire world is the same, it just got older. It's possible that 4 of these tubby nymphs became the quote-unquote Tarnished Four that fought to get into the stomach of Eldertubby Erd.
It may be that if not exposed to the Holy Tubby signal, they could be developmentally stunted, resulting in a Tubby with evil intentions, or some shit. Elder Tubby Erd is likely the protector of whatever signal that Zoo is broadcasting. A tummy portal that could transport whoever crosses through to the source of the signal, potentially a gateway to the Mother Being. The Tarnished Four likely want to stamp out this signal. Finally, Elder Tubby Snoo, the Placekeeper. I believe that Snoo is the central terminal for the Tubby signal, whatever it may be, displaying it in grand fashion for all the Tubby nymphs to see. This planet would be like a mass nursery for the Tubbies, allowing the species to grow and prosper untarnished. He was called the Placekeeper because he kept this grand signal alive in his holy spot.
Until he didn't, because it died by turning into sparkles, like if Tom Holland's Spider-Man died during Pride Month.
Without the display of the Tubby signal, more nymphs may be in danger of becoming tarnished. But that was about to change. The perpetual cries of the Elder Tubbies echoed through the vast empty space. Their cacophony turned into a sharp melody, and then became imperceptibly shrill until it was audible to the mortal ears. Instead, the cry of the eclipse was heard deep in the souls of all things living, sending the world into an era of existential dread. The unending colic could only be quelled by the arrival of Mother, prophesied to take away all pain. However, her promised advent went unanswered for what felt like millennia. Life went from daily anticipation, met with disappointment, to desperate clinging onto a rumor of relief, to despondent whispers of legend nearly long forgotten, until she arrived when the dread of the world was at its zenith. The visual feat was incredible. The heavens were illuminated by the ever-brilliant birth of stars, while simultaneously being swallowed by the inescapable gravity of voidal spheres, emerging from infinite fingertips of palms poised in prayer. An ornate crest of galaxies and ancient symbols danced delicately about the edge of her event horizon, orbiting a pitch-black void at its center. Her scale was beyond gargantuan, beyond cosmic, beyond words and time. It was her, in full, unending glory. Mother Void, the Maker. Beneath her crown and within the void peered outward the eyes of Mother down at her children below. The elder babies gazed upwards at the spectacle of their maker, pained faces yearning for respite. Fret not, children. Mother is here now, and all will be okay. In an instant, Mother pierced open the aura of her void, unleashing a vacuum that silenced the weeping children, absorbing not only light and sound, but also negativity, despair, doubt, anxiety, fear, loneliness, anger, sadness, all absorbed by Mother. Tears of burden rolled down her cheeks. All that remained was an intense quiet across the stars, and every living being stared up at the skies in anticipation. A melodious hum swelled into existence. It was a million angelic tones of lullaby, previously hindered by distance and muffled through static, but no longer. The song source now stood before them all, and she began her tune with an unbelievable symphony. The elder baby's cry was quelled, liberating the world. The melody rang resonant in the core of every being, persisting for millennia beyond, and bringing about an epoch of peace across the lands. It was the birth of a golden era. It was the age of tranquility. It was time for Teletubbies.
Well, that really ties a bow on all of it nicely. Let's break down that final piece of lore, shall we? No? Fuck you, you sarcastic piece of shit.
Mother Void birthed these creatures and placed them all around the galaxy to broadcast her glorious holy signal through their torso screens, using their bodies as a vessel.
God, what I wouldn't do for a Mother Void to use my body as her vessel, if you know what I mean. 'Cause I don't.
She left her children, and they became forlorn without her.
Weird, that's usually the dad's job.
Even her holy signal was not enough to keep them pure in her absence. They grew larger, fearful-looking, and lonelier, surrounding her ever-fading signal like moths to a flame, dreading the day that it would one day be gone, until she returned and ushered in a final age of peace between her subjects. No more tarnished ones, no more loneliness, no more horniness, no more hunger. All beings unified under the Mother Void's signal.
At the end of the day, it really is true what they say. It's time for Teletubbies. Whatever the fuck that means. Well, that's it. Except for one pattern that I noticed that I didn't quite know what to make of. The repeated suggestion of crawling inside another creature's stomach. Like the Elder Moon Baby's gut. Or the Elder Tubby Erd's doorway tummy. Well, are you getting in the giant magical sky baby's horrifically stretched out belly button or not? I don't know what to make of it. I just had it in my notes, and I'm putting in because I thought it was notable. The Eldertubbies. A nightmarish eldritch version of the children's TV series Teletubbies that delves into the mysterious and bizarre elements of the original show, raising questions about the nature of the world and other surreal elements of the program. Eldertubbies shows what happens to the Tubbies as they grow up. And by grow up, I mean grow into massive creatures of unknowable scale. The creator of Eldertubbies, Jar Arts, created these new depictions of the now older classic 4 Tubbies, but also expanded the world with 3 new additions: Eldertubbies Zoo, Snoo, and Erd. While I initially thought this was just a bit of world building to flesh out the Tubby universe and expand upon the implications of a Tubby species, I now see that these 3 new Tubbies have a symbolic connection to the themes of the original Eldertubbies, and the original TV show as well. Let's start with Zoo, obviously named for the iconic Denzel Curry album.
Zoo.
Eldertubbies Zoo represents the invention and integration of the internet, hence why he is the pioneer. This might sound a bit far-fetched, but bear with me here. Teletubbies had televisions in their bodies, and television was a very popular way that most people would consume video media at that time. If the world were to age, there would likely be Tubby forms that represent other ways to consume video media. Eldertubbies Zoo amplifies faint signals from faraway places to show new content alien to anything these new Tubby nymphs have seen. It even specifies that his weird collection of curved back penises is actually a tunnel of antennae, tools that receive or send out signals. This is why he also comes before the 2 new Tubbies. You'll see why, but the existence of Snoo and Erd could not be relevant without first establishing Eldertubbies Zoo. Eldertubbies Snoo, as many of my viewers pointed out in the comments of the other Eldertubbies videos, is a reference to Reddit. You can see from his weird little head dongle that Snoo is based off the Reddit mascot, who is also named Snoo, so that's enough proof for me. Eldertubbies Snoo is more specifically a reference to the subreddit r/place. Abridged from the Wikipedia article on the subject, r/place is a recurring collaborative project hosted on Reddit. Originally launched on April Fool's Day 2017, the experiment involved an online canvas located at a subreddit called r/place. Users could edit the canvas by changing the color of a single pixel with a replacement from a 16-color palette. After each pixel was placed, a timer prevented the user from placing any more pixels for a period of time. It was ended by Reddit administrators 72 hours after its creation. Over 1 million users edited the canvas, placing a total of 16 million pixels. And, at the time of the experiment ending, over 90,000 users were actively viewing or editing the canvas. The parallels to the writing about Eldertubbies Snoo are palpable. The belly screen was the subreddit canvas. The users watching were the viewers staring up at his belly. And the Reddit administrators shutting the program down is when Snoo's belly turned into a bunch of sparkles and went away. I would be remiss if I did not mention that many viewers expressed a dislike for this concept in the comments. And I can understand where they're coming from. I even thought the same thing at first. Oh boy, another Redditor inflating the importance of an already pompous message board where people mostly just butt-actually each other. If you bear with me to the end, I think I can piece together what the author is saying by including these references, and why, after looking deeply into the source material, I think it really improves the story. I don't even like Reddit. Eldertubby Erd, the Gatekeeper. He represents a challenge. To get through his tummy to the other side. To see something that is very hard to obtain access to. Eldertubby Erd represents the video game Elden Ring. He has the logo for the game as his little head dongle, and he's the only Tubby in the story that has Elden as his name prefix rather than Elder. Elden Ring, for those who don't know, is an RPG game notorious for its intense difficulty. The game all but requires you to temporarily turn into a basement dweller and spend days of your life without natural light to figure it out. People who are shit at video games, like myself, complain about this because you cannot change the difficulty setting like other games. So it means that not everybody who buys it can enjoy the full experience. Some people say that this enhances the experience because you have to work for it and learn about the game and its mechanics more deeply by spending hours dying. Personally, I wouldn't charge someone with no legs for a bus ticket and tell them they have to use the stairs to get on or they can't ride. I think that's actually a fucking crime, but sure, sell my dumbass Elden Ring with no easy mode. I'm not salty. As I mentioned earlier, All three of these eldertubbies are connected to each other by their symbolic representation. Reddit could not exist without the internet. You could make the argument that a form of non-downloadable, disc-only version of the Dark Souls franchise could exist, but the community around the game and the consensus on its gatekeeping style of difficulty would not be nearly as popular without the internet. It's the place that both of those communities were built upon. You might be saying, sure, they all connect with each other, but what the hell does all this have to do with the concept of Teletubbies in the first place? I got an answer for all your questions, smartass, so you might as well save them to the end. Eldertubbies is about how TV and video media in general grew up. Not only did the Tubbies grow up, but what they represented, media viewership, grew up too. Not only did it grow up, but it distorted and changed into forms that would be unknowable to those who were watching TV when the Tubbies first came on. Like if someone showed a 2000s person TikTok, they'd be convinced that the world really did end in 2012. The new Eldertubbies, Zoo, Erd, and Snoo represent the new age of consuming media. If the Tubbies grew up, it would make sense that the landscape around them would update with the times. The Teletubbies fostered a community of fans when it was on TV. r/place fostered a community of fans when it's on the internet. And so did Elden Ring. I'm not sure if I would have picked the exact same examples, but I still think it's a really interesting and well-constructed way to develop this concept. Also, I'm literally extrapolating, so Jar Arts, if you see this, I'm sorry. I love your work. I'm an idiot. I might have gotten all this wrong. Who fucking knows? There are still some things I'm confused about in this lore. Mostly Mother Void, and who is the dad? It's not me. I have no idea what the hell all that's about, but if this video does well enough, maybe I'll come back and check out some more weird spooky shit. So make sure to like, comment, and subscribe with all notifications enabled, or I'll put a TV in your bowels. Shout out the inner circle. Love y'all.